TradeSquare is Australia's first business-to-business marketplace connecting people, brands and organisations into this diverse ecosystem in a unique global landscape. Through pivoting, transforming and reshaping, Australian businesses have an opportunity to create the model for the future that aligns with the world's needs and leveraging the power of a collaborative approach. Through the TradeSquare podcast, we will bring together dynamic, diverse and thought-provoking leaders from business, government and organisations to have conversations to further enable new thinking for the future. Welcome to TradeSquare, Australia's leading business-to-business marketplace. I'm Catherine Vandermeer, and joining me today on TradeSquare's podcast is Rosemary Conn, CEO of Schools Plus. How are you, Rosemary?
Great, thanks, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
So lovely to have you here in our space. So tell us, who is Rosemary Conn?
Well, as you can probably tell from my accent, that I grew up in the UK and in a little village in Surrey, and I had quite an exciting childhood in that my father was a hotel designer. So we got to travel a lot when I was younger, and that sort of gave me a strong sense of adventure. And so when I could, I went off to Africa and South America and Central America, sort of traveling and volunteering. And somehow in my sort of mid-20s, I ended up in Sydney and thought I was going to be here for a year, as many people do, and 15 years later I'm still here. So it's been quite an exciting adventure in Sydney. I just fell in love with being by the beach, and Sydney actually gave me the introduction to yoga, which has become a kind of lifelong passion of mine, and it also gave me, I think, the freedom to explore different career opportunities. And so a few years ago, I moved from being a management consultant in the corporate world into the not-for-profit space, and really sort of discovered a sense of purpose in what I do now, and could bring sort of the compassion and my kind of relationship building and a desire to make a difference into what I do every day. So that's, a little bit about me, and still work in progress, I think.
And so tell us about the work you do at Schools Plus.
So Schools Plus is a not-for-profit that was set up to make sure that every child can succeed at school, and it doesn't matter where they live or what background they come from, that they've all got great education opportunities. And we're very passionate about trying to level the education playing field. And so the way that we work is that we connect individuals or organisations that have a passion for supporting education with schools in disadvantaged areas. So that might be schools in rural areas or low socioeconomic areas, or where there are high numbers of students from Indigenous or language background other than English. And what we do is that we enable those schools to bring to life projects that are going to make a difference for their students. So we help through our donors to provide funding and leadership coaching and resources to those schools. And we worked with about 1,000 schools across Australia to date since we started about 6 years ago.
And so how has the role of Schools Plus changed over the last 18 months to create further impact?
Well, it's been a pretty challenging time for schools. So schools have had to really adapt a lot to being in lockdowns and students having to learn remotely. So a lot of schools have had to develop the technology skills required, but also respond to some of the needs that are surfacing through students around mental health and wellbeing. So that's sort of been a real focus of ours and the schools in the last 18 months, because often the kinds of students that we work with might be in home situations which aren't necessarily ideal for learning. That it might just be that it's challenging to have access to technology, or that they're in situations where they're not necessarily safe at home. And so the school becomes that sort of hub of the community. So that's been a big focus for us. And also just thinking about how we can play a role in building capacity within schools and helping to strengthen leadership at a time when leadership in the community has really been critically important.
And so, how have resilient, dynamic, and resourceful individuals really played a key role in working towards transforming education in Australia?
One of the things that we do at Schools Plus is we run the National Teaching Award sponsored by Commonwealth Bank. And so each year we identify 12 amazing teaching fellows. And it's one of my favourite parts of the job is spending time with these teachers and school leaders. And they are doing some incredible things to try and change outcomes for students in really challenging situations. So we've got Anna, who's working in Karratha to try and drive interest and engagement around science, technology, engineering and maths. And then we've got another fellow, Jessica, who's based in Queensland, who's working with Indigenous communities and connecting the community into the school through art and providing that support to students to ensure that they're engaged. And these people are amazing role models, Catherine, and I love spending time with them. And it's incredible how strong our teachers have had to be over the last sort of year. So if we kind of look back to the beginning of last year, started off with bushfires, and I remember speaking to a principal called Kel, who's down in Bateman's Bay area, and he was just saying how the school has become literally the hub of the community. It was distributing emergency support to the local community, and those communities are still kind of reeling from the impact of bushfires, and then COVID came along, and so the importance of creating almost like a place of healing for that school community became really important, and offering that support and trying to lower the kind of community anxiety so that they could support the families and their students. So I've seen some amazing things that teachers and school leaders have done way above and beyond what their sort of role description would suggest.
And I must say, after 9 weeks of homeschooling last year, I think we all had a new level of respect for teachers and what they do every day. So, yeah, absolutely. Those incredible human beings that are doing it each and every day. And so what's a key message that you are passionate about, that you are championing through within your sector?
One of the things that I often find people are surprised at is how there is so much disadvantage still in Australia, and actually COVID has made it worse. So it's unseen, and particularly when some of us live in lovely leafy suburbs or beautiful countryside, that you sort of forget that there are many children who are coming to school when they start school, some of them without the basic language and communication skills. And once they start behind, they stay behind. And so by the time they hit 15, they might be 2.5 years behind a kid that's at a more affluent school. And then that impacts all of us. That impacts our community, their job prospects, and our national well-being. And so that's the sort of message that I've been trying to convey through all of the work that we do, that this is still a big issue and it's not going away, and that there are actually things that we can do about it. And education from a very early age is a really good place to start in addressing a whole raft of other social issues as well.
And so how are you seeing Australian schools really bridge that gap between physical and digital, let's call it phygital, to continue to have that impact?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about resilience and adaptability, and schools have had to learn that in spades. So a lot of schools have had to adapt to a blended learning approach where you've got some kids in the classroom, you've got some online, and then you've got some who are actually working offline. So a lot of the families and students we work with didn't have access to technology or didn't have access to connectivity when the pandemic kicked off. And so we literally had teachers printing off resources and driving around in minivans, delivering them to families. So it's quite extraordinary, the lens that some of them have had to go to. But actually, the online environment of learning has really worked for some kids. So some of them have been able to pace their own learning, and they're outside of the distraction of what's happening in the classroom. And for some kids, that's really worked. For others, not being around their peers and a kind of intermittent experience of online learning has really caused their engagement in what they're doing to suffer. I think we've had a mixed response, and I think it won't be for a little while until some of the assessments come out soon that we'll see what the real impact of COVID has been, particularly when you look at Victoria, for example, in Australia, where some of those kids have had up to 100 days of learning from home. But what teachers have done, which I think is remarkable, is that many of them have been outside of school hours. They've been developing their own skills, teaching themselves how to really truly integrate technology into creating an amazing learning experience. And it's not just about doing what you were doing when you're standing in front of a physical room of children. You really have to adapt to the way that you teach to teach online. So everyone's learning at the same time. But what I think is awesome is that it actually gives teachers and students access to experts and resources that they wouldn't have necessarily had before. And I was hearing this story about a kid called Tom the other day who is remote learning from a cattle station where his parents live, and he does his lessons in the back of a ute on his parents' farm, and he's about 240 k's away from Townsville. But his school has given him access to this amazing virtual STEM academy, and he's loving it, and he's learning in a way that he wouldn't have been able to do if we didn't sort of embrace some of this new technology.
And thank God for the NBN connectivity all across Australia, even 240 kilometres away from civilization.
That's right.
And so thinking about the future, what are some of the hot topics around the boardroom table at Schools Plus?
Well, I think there's no getting away from the fact that it's a tough time for charities at the moment. It's difficult in terms of raising support and ensuring long-term sustainability. So that's definitely one of the things that we have been talking about. And we have been very lucky that the vast majority of our supporters have, in spite of what I think could be kind of looming economic sort of dire situation, that they are doubling down on their support. So that has been good, but it is always an issue. So we've been having a lot of conversations about that, but also about just keeping our focus on making sure that the work we do is really making a difference, and thinking about how we measure and evaluate impact as an organisation, because everything points back to that. If we're putting in time and effort and funding, and donors are essentially investing through us in changing social outcomes for kids, then we need to make sure the work is really making a difference and that we can tell that story well. And I think the other thing that we've been thinking about is how can our work start to have greater influence on the education system, on policy and practice. And that's very much about sharing data and insights and stories from some of the projects that we're supporting.
And so this year, TradeSquare has been connecting to women who choose to challenge in their roles. I'd love to hear how you have chosen to challenge, particularly this year in your role at Schools Plus.
I think well-being has been the word of the last 18 months really for us, and that's been looking externally out to our schools and thinking about how we need to, as an organisation, support the well-being of school leaders so that they can continue to support the well-being of their staff and their students. And it's that analogy of you fit your mask first before you fit others' masks on an aeroplane, that you kind of need to look at your own well-being and look after that first before you can support others in the community. So we've been doing quite a lot of work with our schools around supporting leadership, but also been thinking about that in terms of my own leadership and ensuring that I'm actually looking after my well-being, which is where some of my yoga kicks in, and walking. So I feel like it's all very well me sort of having conversations with my staff about their well-being, but I've got to be modelling it myself. So I've been sticking to my guns about when I go outside and how I think about sort of staying connected with others. And so, yeah, I think well-being has been the challenge that we sort of set ourselves as an organisation, and what we do externally as well.
And I think well-being can mean so many things to different people. How do you describe well-being? Because it does take a holistic approach. What do you mean in that context of well-being of those leaders within the schools?
So I think it's looking after it's both physical and mental. So from I guess when I think about it, I think about sort of how do we ensure that people feel connected to others. And at work, it's about also being connected to a sense of purpose in what they're doing, and that might mean that that they're very much engaged in the vision of what the organisation or school's doing, that they are taking time out to look after their own mental well-being as well. So whether that's through exercise or downtime, and making time for that, and making time to have fun as well wherever we can as an organisation. I think these are all really important. And actually, we engaged a wellbeing consultant to come in and spend a bit of time with us as a team last year, and it was really helpful. And I think it just reminded me of the importance of being authentic at work as well, and that contributing to everyone's well-being, so people can feel like they can bring their full selves to work. And so we often have people talking about what's going on for them in their work environments, particularly now that some of us in the team are in lockdown. There isn't that kind of hard divide anymore between what's happening at home and work life. So we need to help people manage that effectively.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your world, Rosemary, with TradeSquare.
Thank you.
For more information on TradeSquare, head to www.tradesquare.com.au and support Australian business economic recovery and growth with a collaborative approach to the future of business.